So when folks take the anti-estrangement, you must stay in contact, you only have one family stance, they're basically saying, play the bad hand you were dealt, no matter the harm it does to you. To which I say, F that. Bear with me for a minute. I'm imagining a theme park. Better than any so-called happiest place on the blank. You know the rest. I don't need the corporate mouse folks coming after me. But just imagine a place. Again, we'll call it a theme park. Where everything's sane. In this world, people listen and pay attention most of the time. They respond. They may not always do or say what you want, but you figure it out, and they don't deny what you ask them or tell you that you are selfish because you ask them something as simple as, could you put the keys back on the hook? I want you to imagine a place where the other people are actually aware of each other and take note that maybe someone's sort of doing too much and someone steps in and checks in on them or helps them out or senses that someone is sad or having a tough day or offers some soothing words or even brings them some chicken soup. In this place, people may tell small lies. You look good in that dress, but not big ones. I'm working late instead of I'm having an affair. People have empathy in this place, and you can be your true self and feel safe. Sounds like a nice place, huh? Well, let me tell you where this whole concept came to from me. I was navigating and negotiating a situation that involved a person who was narcissistic and deeply selfish. And in the midst of this, someone very kind was being harmed and all of that. It was very clear that there was a right way to move forward and fix the problems, something that had been an issue for a long time. And no matter what has been suggested by other people, by the people in it, to address what was going on, it's just going to be a bigger problem because nothing was ever changing. That was going to hurt everyone in the story, including myself. But actually, it wasn't even really the best situation for the selfish person either. The group of people all involved in this mess have experienced grief and anger, frustration, isolation. And because of blockades, there's no real solution to make it better. Most people have walked away, leaving this small final group of people with a big mess, not enough resources to fix it, and an exhausted group of people who keep limping through the situation and just keep watching it get worse. A simple analogy to this would be there is a house, and the house has a hole in the roof. So whenever it rains, it leaks a lot, and that damages the house more. And on top of that, the rain gets into the house, and people slip and fall on the floor, and they get hurt. So the normal suggestion there would be fix the roof. But the person who owns the house says, never! I will never fix the roof. But I do expect all of you to come here and mop it up when it rains and take care of me if I should slip and fall. See what the scenario is here? So let's call this place, that theme park I was talking about, let's call it Sanity Land. Well, people who live in Sanity Land came and saw the situation we were all in and saw it was not good, and they made all kinds of suggestions on how to fix the situation. All of their suggestions were logical and sane and would have fixed the problem pretty quickly. But the selfish person at the core of it would never let those solutions happen. And what struck me about that moment when I heard these people from Sanity Land was the grief I felt. Ironically, the grief over people who don't get it, making relatively innocuous and frankly sensible suggestions that we had long since given up on. That was more stressful to me than the day-to-day stress and strain of having to manage the situation. Wasting hours on errands and caregiving and other solutions felt easier than trying to talk to the selfish person about meaningful solutions. In a way, the Sanity people pissed me off because I wanted to say to them, do you not think that I didn't think about this decades ago? As though they were suggesting it like it was something new, and by them thinking they were suggesting something new implied that they must think that I'm somewhere beyond stupid. If you've ever been through a narcissistic relationship where, for example, I don't know, you're dealing with a spouse who keeps doing things that piss you off and has been doing those things for many, many years, And people are even noticing it. And then someone weighs in with absolutely inane advice such as, have you tried talking to him? Or maybe you have a narcissistic, combative, and abusive adult child, and someone steps in and says, have you tried setting boundaries with them? It can take every ounce of strength you have to not look at them and say, wow, that thought never crossed my mind. I will try that now. My favorite is when the people from Sanity Land, when they come and witness a narcissism situation that, again, you simply are in a position where you cannot address, says something to you like, well, just make them do it. Sure, that's what I'm going to do. The painful workarounds that you have to do to keep the mess of a narcissistic relationship going when there is no getting out. So for example, you may do something like maybe driving an hour out of your way each day to pick up kids from school, even though the narcissistic person works around the block. Or going to 3 different houses for a holiday to the point you feel sick from eating pie, or having to exhaust yourself caring for an aging parent who refuses to move or work with other carers or helpers or paid help from outside of the family, or having to eat your vegetarian meal in the car before you go to see a family because they refuse to meet you on a dietary preference or even serve what you make for dinner. People from Sanity Land would tell people in these situations, well, can't you just explain to them that they work closer to the kids' school? Or that you have to work and it's too hard for you to help them? Can't you just tell them you don't eat meat? Yeah, great. Thanks for the news flash. Never thought of it. But when you step out of the distorted, insane, inefficient, invalidating, painful world of the narcissistic relationship, and then people from Sanity Land swing by for a visit or to offer up some commentary, strangely enough, that's worse. That's not to say you are not sane. If you can actually keep getting up in the morning despite having to navigate the insanity of a narcissistic relationship, you are clearly sane and based in reality, though it's hard to hold on to every day. But you have to morph into a person who radically accepts the madness. You have to suspend reality, and you have to figure out the workarounds. Then, sometimes people from Sanity World will give the impossible advice of, well, if it's so impossible, then just leave. Don't talk to them. Let them figure it out themselves. And going through your mind are the calculations on family court or financial abuse or post-separation abuse or cultural and practical issues and the roller coaster ride of the trauma bond. Things are much simpler in Sanity Land. When people have not spent significant amounts of time or had significant relationships shaped by narcissism, they just don't get it. People from Sanity Land live in a place where communication works, where solutions are considered. The solutions may not always work, but at least they're considered. Where people work together collaboratively, where they do things, take action, and they quite often lead to meaningful results. So for the Sanity Land people to come into places where none of that is true, not only do they have nothing to offer, you can be left feeling tapped out, crazy, angry, guilty, and ultimately feeling even more grief. We feel bad because we know that the people from Sanity Land don't mean any ill will. They just don't get it. So when we became so angry at them at times, we feel as though we're bad for being angry at someone who's just giving us good advice, and the beat goes on. A major reason why people become so isolated in narcissistic relationships and systems is all of this. You acculturate, or you're born into, the distorted narcissistic culture. And when you have to go back and forth between people who have seemingly more balanced lives than your own, for example, seeing the lives of peers or colleagues, that can be a catalyst for grief. And that sense that there is something wrong with us, which brings up shame. It can slowly feel easier to just not be in the world of other people, or to narrow it, or to find people who have similar messed up circumstances. And when the folks from Sanity Land just happen to come into your world and want to be helpful, it can be quite jarring. Listen, I would love to live in Sanity Land. I'd be happy to go there for a day, where things feel safe and balanced and supportive. I don't. I mean, I've vacationed in Sanity Land from time to time, but when I get back to real life, it's almost too disjointed, and I start to feel that the breaks that I take in Sanity Land almost make Narcissism Land more unbearable. The Sanity Land folks sometimes bring into starker contrast what a mess our narcissistic relationship situations are. You know what I mean. You might have a crappy narcissistic marriage and you just figured out how to get through the days. And then you go to the home of someone who has a more balanced, not antagonistic, communicative, loving marriage. And you feel like the wind was knocked out of you. And that starker contrast can increase our level of distress. You don't mean the friend any ill will, but the difference can be heartbreaking. Staying in Narcissism Land starts to feel easier. Listen, I don't know if anyone living in this damn world we're living in now is completely sane. Nobody has a perfect or ideal marriage or family, but this isn't about ideal. This is about families and relationships and workplaces that listen, that don't gaslight. And most of us in these relationships are as sane as the next guy. But when people roll around with the reminder that there is something a lot simpler and more efficient than our duct-taped build the airplane in the sky solutions that are wearing us out, it sucks. I have a feeling I'll be living in Narcissism Land for a long while, and for now, I do try as much as possible to kind of actively steer clear of the folks from Sanity Land. When I'm in the acute throes of it, it's too stressful and exhausting. That may change someday, but for now, let's just say, while the user experience in Narcissism Land is not great, at least I know the territory and how to navigate it. So just when I think I have heard every way that survivors of these relationships could be shamed, I hear yet another. So my morning doom scrolling means reading the news. And more tellingly than the news are the comment sections. The news is bad enough. But where I really learn what people in narcissistic relationships are up against as they heal is definitely the comment sections. Because it's here that ordinary folks, since most of us are not journalists or close to journalists who aren't edited, make their opinions, unfettered opinions, known. And one comment I recently read in particular caught my interest, because it sort of encapsulated to me why so many survivors feel so shut down, despite the encouragement from some people to talk it out. I forget that there may be many more invalidating than validating voices out there. The article itself that I was reading was talking about things, books, articles, whatever, that people should read to learn about mental health. Like they were like sort of first-person stories about mental health. Ironically, almost all of the stories they highlighted were about the types of mental health stories that feel more comfortable or accessible. People who had a diagnosed mental illness themselves, such as depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, maybe addiction, things like that were on the list. Ultimately, what it got at is that these were people who were telling, for example, their story of depression from the point of view of the person who has depression, person who has schizophrenia. It's more of like a disease model telling of mental health. And I had read some of the books and things on the list. They were powerful and good books. But one thing that was completely missing from the list was books by or about people who had experienced things like domestic abuse or violence, interpersonal trauma by people they knew, and trusted people such as family, or emotional abuse or intergenerational abuse, and there sure as hell weren't any on narcissistic abuse. None of that was represented on this list. We don't like stories about mental health that implicate the behaviors of other people. And we definitely don't like it when that abuse doesn't meet some threshold that somehow society deems should be met. Physical abuse, severe enough sexual abuse. It has to be bad enough for the general audience to be willing to clock it as trauma. What we don't want to account for is that the accumulative daily betrayals, invalidations, criticism, subjugation, and denial of reality that a person endures in any kind of abusive or narcissistic relationship, whether in childhood or adulthood, is harmful. It's betrayal trauma. It's a relational trauma. And as such, as a field in mental health and psychology and in the mainstream, don't want to recognize any of this. If a person thinks their parent was toxic or their spouse is emotionally abusive, we are more likely to criticize the person who was being emotionally abused for being so dismissive or not understanding that there are 2 points of view in a relationship or that everyone has different ways of expressing anger than we are to clock this emotionally abusive pattern as harmful, really harmful, and having very real mental health impacts. We want tidy mental illness stories. So back to the comment section. The comment that led me to stop reading and put the damn device down and feed the cat was when one person's comment was they were recommending a really great book about a woman's experience with complex trauma. And then another commenter replied to that comment and said, "Oh no, everyone I know who reads these books about complex trauma just become navel-gazing complainers who just want to talk about their trauma, or that they have had to disengage from family members, or want to talk about what they are still trying to manage." And then that commenter goes on to say that everything just melts into that person, the other person who has complex trauma self-absorption. I have no doubt that many of you have someone in your life who has said something like this to you, or at least had a sort of sneery, eye-rolling vibe around you. These are the very people who don't want your relationship to be just superficial, like your friendship with them. But when you do share something vulnerable with them, then you are navel-gazing, self-absorbed, therapy-speaking fools. And it may be that some folks really only want superficial conversations. My guess is that the commenter on that article may prefer maybe that the conversation only be about her. But when I saw that comment, after I got past the anger, I really felt sad. Who knows what her problem is? But she represented what I know many other people have shared with me. You can share about yourself, but don't share so much that I'm uncomfortable. And make sure you get along with your family, and then talk about pleasant stuff, and only talk about stuff I want. It's no wonder that relationships can feel fraught for survivors of narcissistic relationships. Because especially if you are still in the narcissistic relationship or just getting out of it, you are confused. Relationships are already messed up places. Places that only work if you give up on yourself, be what the other person wants, shape yourself to their reality and what they want. Just figuring out how to be in new relationships can be really challenging for people who are healing. You sometimes find yourself sort of going back and forth between oversharing and undersharing, between opening up and finding you can't stop, to feeling numb and silenced. And knowing that there are people out there who sit in sneering judgment that you are selfishly navel-gazing because you're sharing about yourself, and that the ruminating voices sometimes just need to come out of you, and that most of you are just looking for a safe place to land or share, that comment was the height of selfishness. And yet, when survivors encounter someone who takes that kind of stance, like that commenter, Oh God, again, you're going to go talk about going no contact with your mother or about your husband's gaslighting? Sarcasm optional. Once again, you have entered a relationship where you are told, please don't burden me with your stuff. I guess I'm just sharing with you what you have already, I am sure, experienced many times. The world can feel like a whole lot of damned if you do, damned if you don't when you are in one of these relationships. The challenge is knowing that this is not everyone, but sifting through it all and finding the safe spaces is not easy, and it can feel impossible and demoralizing. Other people's discomfort, contempt, and disdain for your pain, for your situation, and for the things that you have had to endure in these relationships doesn't mean that your experience isn't important. It's because that other person lacks empathy or capacity. And once again, we are back at the fundamental truth when it comes to these relationships and how the world regards people who are stuck in something that they never asked for. You got to keep remembering, it's not you. Finding new friends and new social supports is never easy. But paying attention to this kind of dismissiveness and learning with whom you can show up as your whole self can transform this experience from cutting off parts of yourself to valuing yourself enough to recognize that some people just aren't worthy of getting to see your whole you. And that is their loss. Now, narcissistic relationships are volatile, confusing, upsetting, frustrating, soul-sapping, and they definitely do not bring out the best in the other person in the relationship, the, if you will, not narcissistic person. And many of us can look back at moments in the relationship where we weren't at our best. We can. But it's also more than that. What can look like petty nonsense to people on the outside of your narcissistic relationship may actually be an accumulation of lots of emotional abuse for a long time. So when, let's say you're doing something like holding your ground on something that's really not fair, you may be the ones that are made to look like you're difficult, but people do not recognize that you may have given in 100 times before, and that this time, for a variety of reasons, you're sticking to what matters to you. Maybe it's true north related stuff, but you don't budge. And then you're looked at suspiciously. Now, in some narcissistic relationships, especially in the early days of the relationship, you may react strongly to being gaslighted. Early on, we do. And as time goes on, there may be days that you react strongly to ongoing criticism and passive-aggressive barbs. In one story I recall, it's from a long time ago, I thought of as I was making this video, I was consulting on a couples therapy case. I was seeing the person who was being narcissistically harmed, and I had a meeting with their couples therapist. And every week, I worked with my client to ensure that we were working on clear communication in the session. This is a client who would sometimes have a freeze or a fawn response to the partner and to other people in their life, and that they'd to sort of do work to help them stay calm, that they'd even bring in notes to couples therapy, staying calm in couples therapy, and they went on for months in couples therapy like this. And interestingly, it was almost like a standoff. The narcissistic partner was playing their cards close to their chest and not sharing much, just making some vague complaints and always defending themselves. The client I was working with stayed calm, and interestingly, kind of nothing happened. It was a bit of a stalemate. Then a series of events happened that just touched a nerve with the client who was being narcissistically abused. And in the session, the narcissistic partner said something that set the client that I was working with off, and she got very agitated and angry and spoke her mind. And the thing that will always piss me off, it's a long time since this particular situation happened, but the thing that will always piss me off, and it still kind of pisses me off, is that the couples therapist said, my consultation with the couples therapist said, well, Ramani, your client finally showed their true colors. Now I recognize they're both crazy. I'm like, no, they're effing not. My client was a test case for how much one person could regulate and hold in all of their emotion so they wouldn't drive this theory that my client was the problem. And then the client sort of slips one time. And I wouldn't even say that the client slipped. I would say that when the partner came after something that mattered to my client, it was a true north thing in this case, that was what the catalyst was. And then that one time that this client broke, that's viewed to be the true nature of the person being narcissistically abused. It was clear that the narcissistic partner was behaving badly, but now they were both viewed as bad. This need to view both people in a narcissistic relationship as the problem is a problem. Don't get me wrong. There are definitely more than a few relationships where both people in a narcissistic relationship are narcissistic and antagonistic, or where the narcissistically abused person is retaliating or behaving in ways that really aren't okay. They may be understandable, but still not okay. I still see the narcissistically abused person's behavior through the context of what is happening in the relationship. But frankly, I don't think both people in the relationship are crazy. However, when you have one person who is regularly getting dismantled and emotionally abused in every which way by a person who is able to put on a hell of a performance in public and play the victim to boot, and they are overregulated, and because the world can't make sense of the narcissistic person, that the world just assumes that both people in this relationship are crazy. No, that's just a way for the world to feel better about the world and make it less scary. Here's the thing, folks, be scared. Narcissism is hiding in plain sight all around you. And do not invalidate the experience of people in these relationships so you can make sense of the world that you want to live in. We don't live in that world. That story that I shared about the person who finally, when they did speak out in couples therapy, was immediately said, look, they both have something wrong with them. That story stuck in my head and only double reinforced actually my drive to want to do this work, because I knew the client well and there was nothing crazy about them. They were, for a variety of reasons and a lifetime of trauma, trying to make the best of a bad situation, right? So the minor children were involved, there's financial issues, and after months of this overregulation in couples therapy, despite having a seething, mean partner, this client was able to keep it together. And then one day they actually just showed a human reaction and were sort of dubbed as crazy. That's not okay. I have no doubt that many of you have been looked at sideways because of your own history in narcissistic relationships, regardless of what it was, intimate relationship, parent, whatever. Some of you might be from narcissistic family systems where you get lumped in with the toxicity of the family system and written off as, oh, that family, they're all nuts. Or in a narcissistic workplace where maybe a very difficult, manipulative, power-hungry person runs the show, and everyone who works there is viewed through that perspective of, oh, everyone who works there is dysfunctional. But where this "you are both crazy" rubric does the most harm is in the world of family court and in the entire divorce industrial complex. Obviously, during a divorce, emotions are running high. A marriage is ending. In some cases, custody issues are on the table. There are huge financial decisions being made. And a narcissistic person who obviously is going to be losing their mind because they're not in control of everything and someone is trying to sort of, ping at their money. So the narcissistic person typically attempts to co-opt all of the legal proceedings. And as you sit there, you are watching what are pretty straightforward laws around community property and custody and, frankly, basic common sense be turned upside down by very well-paid people who simply don't get it. But when these cases get drawn out, even when you aren't showing any volatility, but you are having to fight hard to ensure basic stipulations in a parenting agreement, or push back on a person who is hiding money or engaging in other financial shenanigans, it takes a minute for these divorces. These are not collaborative or amicable divorces because it can't be when a narcissistic person is concerned. So then the judge or the mediator or the custody evaluator or whatever other hangers-on there are making money on this process will say, well, both people are being difficult. They're both behaving badly. This kind of discourse, both people are behaving badly, has actually resulted in sometimes tragic custody agreements, extortionate financial setups, and messy situations that can cause long-standing harm to the children involved. But after all, both parents are nuts, right? And this quick and easy framing can mean that the situation is not examined with a critical or an antagonism-informed eye, nor is it looked at through understanding the larger world of narcissism. If I hear one more person say that everyone in a divorce thinks their ex is a narcissist, actually, no, not everyone does think that. So the hardest part of all is that people in narcissistic relationships are already blaming themselves, saying things like, I was the one dumb enough to get into this. Maybe it's my fault. I could have said this differently. Well, they said that I am too demanding. Maybe I am. Well, like my mom is too demanding, so maybe I'm like my mom. On and on and on. So that means when people from the outside weigh in and say, well, you are both a handful. You are kind of both difficult. You are both crazy. Well, that seems plausible to a person in a narcissistic relationship. And this kind of rhetoric can sometimes push people to keep believing that they are the problem. It can dismantle radical acceptance. And then a person may stop seeing the situation of this narcissistic relationship clearly and go back into it and just keep enduring the harms of the relationship. I can't expect a judge or a lawyer or a family member or an HR person to know from narcissism. That's not their training. I would love if they would, and we can keep trying, but right now, most don't or don't think it's relevant. So that means it's very, very simplistic to go and view all of the gaslighted, messy, unkind, confusing, manipulative dynamics of the narcissistic relationship as just a situation that has two problematic people in it. And that leaves you as survivors often in a far worse position. So folks, here's the thing. Nobody wants to be estranged from their family. So this morning, I read an interesting article about whether cutting off your family is good therapy. And even as I read it, I knew it would not end well. Some of you, not a lot, but some of you watching this video have gone no contact with your family of origin. Some of you have not. And every encounter you continue to have with your family is abusive and invalidating. And for a range of reasons, you may feel like you can't go no contact. And those of you who do not perceive an issue with your families or actually come from healthy families are probably not watching this video. So to those of you who went no contact, I'm going to ask you a couple questions. Was that an easy decision? Did you just go no contact after one argument? Did you go no contact because your family did one thing that hurt your feelings? Did you go no contact just because your parent didn't agree with you? My guess is no, you didn't. You went no contact because of an endless accumulation of wounds, hurts, invalidations, and in some cases, frank abuse and trauma that would be re-experienced every time you were with the narcissistic parent or family system. And ultimately, it became a choice between your identity and mental health and well-being and life, and continuing to see through some kind of obligation or guilt or sense that only people in really bad situations go no contact. To those of you who have not gone no contact, but keep enduring the same abusive patterns, I know the reasons that people stay in these family systems. Some people maintain contact because they feel guilt, obligation, doubt their own perception of the situation, and wonder if maybe they're reading it wrong, or they're being unfair, or they're making too big a deal out of it. Some of you stay in contact with a family because you have financial ties to a family, or because you are interlinked into a family system in which maybe you have children whom you want them to have a relationship with grandparents or extended family, but you still wonder if your parent will do to your kids what they did to you. Some of you have parents who threaten to harm themselves or even harm your other parent if you don't show up, and you can't keep calling 911, so it's just easier to show up. Some of you are still trauma bonded and think that it can still change. Some of you are afraid of the shame and the idea of any kind of no contact, or the idea of estrangement and the shame that estrangement brings up for you, which is incredibly understandable. Some of you would go no contact if you could, and have fantasies of what your life would be like if you did not ever have to deal with your parents again. Unfortunately, the article I read was not as balanced as it could have been, and it sort of simply wrote off the painful decision around estrangement or no contact as almost sort of like an easy way to not have to deal with the family anymore, which I believe missed the point. And then, of course, they interviewed old guard therapists who think it's just so terrible that any therapist would ever encourage a client to go no contact. And by the way, therapists don't encourage no contact. Good therapists understand it and support a client in the client's own decision making. As therapists, we're not supposed to have an agenda, but we're also human beings. And we can witness what having ongoing contact is doing to our clients. Any therapist who's able to remain neutral at witnessing a client be reharmed every single time they have contact with an abusive parent may want to go empathy shop. If it was as simple as don't have an agenda therapist, then AI is coming for my job really soon, which I think frankly it already is. But of course, the pièce de résistance in these articles is the comment section. And here's where that article got really interesting. Most of the commenters were teed up to shame the folks who were estranged from their families and went after the therapists who supported the decision. They'd say things like, family is great, you need family, go family, being an adult is about compromise, these darn kids who just go no contact did that because their parent didn't give them their way. My guess is that a fair proportion of these commenters are the parents that the kids went no contact with, or just the really judgmental chorus of voices that shames anyone who has had to disengage from or distance from a family. The tricky thing with family is that family is about luck, like lots of things in life, but nowhere else is that luck more manifest than family. Some people get really, really lucky. They're born to loving, present, kind, well-regulated, patient people who listen. It doesn't matter if there's money or resource or not. I mean, money helps, but I've known folks raised in families where there were few resources, but there were lovely parents and other adults, and it was an inheritance like no other. And damn, the folks who grew up with resources and have really nice people, I mean, that's Powerball level luck shit. And some kids are born to narcissistic or alcoholic or mean or manipulative or deceitful parents who had no place having kids. These are dysregulated, cruel, withholding, abandoning, put their own needs before their child's needs people. That's just bad luck. The child is not responsible for their parents' lack of qualification or capacity to be a parent. It's bad luck. So when folks take the anti-estrangement, you must stay in contact, you only have one family stance, they're basically saying, play the bad hand you were dealt, no matter the harm it does to you, to which I say, F that. Encountering a narcissistic or toxic or harmful relationship in childhood is very different than if it happens to you for the first time in adulthood. And as a result, things that are done to us in adulthood, for example, what we may encounter in a relationship with an intimate partner or a friend, may not do the same level of scathing harm that it does in childhood. The silent treatment, the withholding, that stuff in childhood is lethal. It terrifies the child who is genuinely afraid that the parents will go away and metaphorically and literally disappear. So the child will do anything to end that silent treatment and slowly then get subjugated into a cycle of being that parent's narcissistic supply, emotional babysitter, tool of regulation, and being the parent's parent. How is that forgivable? All of this shapes the child's identity and frankly thwarts the child's identity that now gets shaped solely around the idea that I have to be what my parent wants so I can be loved, and then ultimately sets a person up for a lifetime of subjugated relationships if the cycle doesn't get broken. And folks, as you know too well, this is not an easy cycle to break. And parents are like kryptonite. You may actually be functioning well in other areas of your life, like work and friends, but then having to see that parent again can lead you to feel like that subjugated and scared child again. And that parent is not going to change. So for some folks, no contact or avoiding contact is the only path forward. Even in the article, there were parents interviewed who felt oh so sad about how much of their adult children's lives that they were missing, graduations and weddings and grandkids, and a small acknowledgement like, yeah, I was an alcoholic, and yeah, I screamed a lot and made the house a scary place, but that was then. Can't they see that I'm trying? It's not a child's job to see that you're trying, whether that child is a child or an adult. That parent has to recognize that we get one chance at childhood, and the harms that are done at that time, while to some degree are fixable, those fixes aren't easy. And even with the fixes, those wounds don't ever go fully away. So the adult parent still makes it about themselves. Oh, I'm missing out on so much, and sure, I did a few bad things, rather than my behavior must have been terrifying for a child, and it wasn't okay. Making amends doesn't mean the other person has to accept them. And even the most skilled apology does not carry with it the requirement that the other person has to take it and clean the slate. Perhaps the only way to move forward is to recognize the slate will forever remain messy, and then backing that up with radical acceptance, all of that means that your parent likely will always remain locked into these patterns. Choose accordingly. Many people who are estranged struggle until the end of their parents' lives and beyond. Should I have gone to visit? And then, for those who do go visit, will say, "Oi, that was a mistake." There are no winners in this. For some folks, the only way to maintain a healthy adult life is to go no contact. And given what we know about any kind of antagonistic or toxic personality style, that makes sense. The parent is not likely to change, and the subjugation cycle will then shift to how selfish and unforgiving that you are, that you can't just let go of the past, Junior, and they were just not ready to be a parent, etc., etc. You know the drill. Listen, I can say this as a therapist. I have worked with many, many clients where in my heart, my hope was that they would go no contact, because I could see how devastated they were every time they had contact with their parents or their family of origin. And they were living their lives in a psychological purgatory with parents who had no capacity for insight. But it wasn't my place to say go no contact. My role was to support their decisions and shore them up for the inevitable disappointment and help them connect the dots. I have also had clients go no contact and doubt that decision every single day. And every so often, there was a client who went no contact and blossomed, and they saw that the going no contact is what contributed to their growth. There is one more twist here. And that is, if you are a parent who is disengaging from a toxic, narcissistic, manipulative, antagonistic child, it raises similar issues. Now, if the parent who's disengaging is antagonistic and the child is antagonistic, then all bets are off, and I just hope that nobody really gets hurt. But if the parent who's choosing to disengage is not antagonistic, or perhaps one parent was and the other parent was not, and the non-antagonistic parent is the one who's choosing to disengage, the damage is done where the child's concerned. Some parents, after years of being financially abused, lied to, taken advantage of, raged at by their child, will come to this decision as well. Again, it's not easy and even more complex because a parent making this decision may also reflect back onto what was their contribution on their own child's behavior. Estrangement is like a train depot with lots of lines coming in and out. There's no simple pathway to this. So no, TikTok or YouTube or the internet is not what is leading people to become estranged from their toxic, harmful, invalidating families of origin. It's the family's behavior that's leading to that. Everybody wants to belong to a family system, and nobody gives it up lightly. But for the first time ever, we're having deeper conversations about what the meaning of going no contact from a harmful family system is, the grief around it, but also understanding that in some cases, some people actually find solace in it, and that instead of shaming people who make an incredibly difficult decision, perhaps we all need to pause a moment and really hear their story. Thanks again.